Let's look at the scoreboard. And I don't mean the stock market, or the GDP, or the unemployment numbers they feed you on the evening news. I want you to look at the only number that actually matters. The United States government officially owes $38 trillion. Japan owes $9 trillion. Europe is drowning in $14 trillion. If you take every nation on Earth, every sovereign state, and add it all up, the planet owes $315 trillion. Let that sink in. $315 trillion. That is 3 times the size of the entire global economy. If every human being on Earth, man, woman, and child sold everything they owned, every house, every car, every shirt off their back, we still couldn't pay it off. But pause here. Stop the clock. Ask the question that almost nobody asks because it sounds too simple. It sounds almost childish. If everyone owes money, who exactly do they owe it to? We don't owe money to Mars. We didn't borrow gold from a bank on the moon. There are no aliens collecting interest payments. So, if every nation is in debt, where is all this wealth going? Who is on the other side of the ledger? Here is the uncomfortable truth. The red pill that changes how you see the world. The world doesn't owe money to anyone in particular. The system owes it to itself. It sounds like a glitch in the matrix, right? Like a gigantic accounting error? Or maybe just collective insanity? It is none of those things. It is a deliberate, carefully engineered design choice. This system, this cage of numbers that we all live inside, was not an accident. It was built. It was constructed by 4 specific architects across 3 different centuries. These men didn't just build banks. They built a prison, a machine where debt is never meant to be repaid, where interest flows upwards forever, from your labor to their ledgers. They designed a game where the house doesn't just win. The house owns the players. Today, on the Economic Chronicler, we are going to open the blueprint. We are going to name the names. We are going to walk through the smoke-filled rooms and the secret meetings. I'm going to show you exactly how they engineered the trap, why 38 trillion isn't a mistake, and why, if you don't understand this history, you will never truly understand who owns your future. To understand the first bar of the cage, we have to travel back to a very specific moment in time. The year is 1694. The place is London. The atmosphere is desperate. England is fighting a massive, exhausting war against France. King William III is on the throne, but he has a serious problem. He is broke. His treasury is empty. The soldiers need to be paid, the ships need to be built, and the gold is gone. Now, in the old days before 1694, kings borrowed money the honest way. They would go to a wealthy merchant or a goldsmith and say, "Lend me 100 gold coins, and I will pay you back 110 next year." But there was a catch. Kings were terrible borrowers. If a king couldn't pay his debts, he wouldn't sit at the bankruptcy table. He didn't negotiate. He just cut off your head. Or he simply refused to pay, claiming divine right. It was a high-risk game. Because of this, nobody wanted to lend to King William. The credit markets were frozen. England was on the verge of collapse. Enter William Paterson. Paterson wasn't a general. He wasn't a duke. He was a Scottish merchant, a visionary, and frankly, a bit of a hustler. He had traveled the world. He had seen how markets worked, and he approached the king's government with a proposal that sounded insane. He said, "I will gather a syndicate of wealthy merchants. We will lend you 1.2 million pounds in gold, a massive fortune, enough to win your war." The king's ministers asked, "And when do we have to pay the principal back?" And here lies the genius and the horror of Paterson's idea. He smiled and said, "Your Majesty, you don't have to pay back the principal. Ever." The room must have gone silent. No repayment? Was this charity? No, Paterson explained. You never repay the gold. You simply pay the interest. 8% a year. Every year. Forever. This was the devil's bargain. The king got his money immediately to fight the French. But in exchange, the taxpayers of England were hooked onto a drip feed of interest payments that would never end. To manage this arrangement, Paterson proposed creating a new institution. A private company with a fancy name, the Bank of England. Why was this revolutionary? Why was this the seed of the trap? Because before this moment, debt was temporary. You borrowed, you paid back, you were free. Paterson turned debt into a permanent asset. The merchants who lent the money didn't want the gold back. They wanted the annuity. They wanted the safe, guaranteed stream of tax money flowing into their pockets for eternity. But Paterson went one step further. He created alchemy. He realized that since the government promised to pay interest forever, the receipts for that loan were valuable. The Bank of England began to issue paper notes backed by the king's debt. People started trading these notes. They started using them to buy bread, land, and ships. The king's debt became the people's money. Do you see the magic trick? The more the government borrowed, the more money circulated in the economy. If the government ever paid off its debt, the money supply would vanish. Paterson succeeded in convincing the world that debt is wealth. Paterson successfully convinced the world that debt was wealth. He died in 1719, not particularly wealthy himself, but the system he built, the engine of perpetual interest, was just getting started. The seed was planted, but a seed needs a web to grow into a global monster. Fast forward 100 years. The early 1800s. The Bank of England model works, but it has a limitation. It is local. If France goes bankrupt, England doesn't care. If Austria collapses, it's Austria's problem. The debts were isolated islands. Enter architect number 2, Nathan Rothschild. The Rothschild family needs no introduction, but we need to strip away the conspiracy theories and look at the actual financial mechanism they built. They were the first true multinational corporation. 5 brothers, stationed in 5 major capitals: London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, Naples. While other bankers were moving gold in slow, heavy wagons, the Rothschilds were moving information. They had private courier boats. They had horses stationed at relay points. They even used carrier pigeons. They knew the price of wheat in Paris before the bakers in London did. But Nathan Rothschild, sitting in London, realized something crucial. Power isn't just about having money. It's about being indispensable. He industrialized the bond market. Here is what he did. He made government debt tradable across borders. He created a system where a British government bond could be bought by a French aristocrat, sold to a German bank, and used as collateral for a loan in Austria. He wove a spiderweb of financial dependency across the entire continent. The most famous story is the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. We've all heard how Nathan knew about Napoleon's defeat a full day before the British government. He used that information to make a killing on the bond market. But the profit he made that day is irrelevant compared to the system he solidified. By the 1820s, the Rothschilds were the central bank of Europe in all but name. If a government wanted to go to war, they needed the Rothschilds to sell their bonds. If they wanted to build a railroad, they needed the Rothschild network to find investors. But here is the trap part. Because Rothschild connected everyone's debt to everyone else, he created systemic risk. Before him, if a king defaulted, a few rich merchants lost their shirts. Who cares? After Rothschild, if a major government defaulted, the French investor would crash, the German bank would collapse, and the Austrian economy would freeze. He made the debt trap inescapable because he made it dangerous to leave. Governments were now forced to keep borrowing and keep paying interest, not just to fund their operations, but to prevent the collapse of the entire international financial system. They were terrified. They were no longer sovereign nations. They were hostages to the bond market. and the bond market was run by the bankers. So, Paterson made debt permanent. Rothschild made it global, but there was still one problem. A physical problem. You can only lend as much money as there is gold in the vaults. Gold is heavy, it's scarce, and you can't print it. The bankers needed a way to break the chains of reality. They needed magic on an industrial scale. The year is 1910. The location is Jekyll Island, off the coast of Georgia. If this sounds like the start of a mystery novel, it's because the reality was stranger than fiction. 6 men boarded a private train car in New Jersey. They were told to use only their first names. No reporters. No staff. These 6 men represented about 25% of the world's entire wealth at the time. They included associates of J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, and the Warburgs. They went to a private hunting club on Jekyll Island for 9 days. They didn't hunt ducks. They hunted the ultimate prize, control over the U.S. currency. America, at the time, was a problem for bankers. It was becoming an economic superpower, but it didn't have a central bank. It had a gold standard. Money was tight. If the banks made bad bets, they failed. There was no safety net. So, these men wrote the legislation for what would become the Federal Reserve System. They were smart. They knew the American public hated the idea of a central bank. It sounded too European, too monarchist. So they called it the Federal Reserve. They made it look like a government agency. They gave it a board appointed by the president. But make no mistake, the engine under the hood was pure banking power. Passed in 1913, just before Christmas when most of Congress was away, the Federal Reserve Act changed the physics of money. Here is the mechanism they unlocked: elastic currency. Before 1913, if the government wanted to borrow $10 million, there had to be $10 million of gold or savings in the economy to lend. After 1913, the Federal Reserve could simply create money out of thin air to buy government bonds. Think about the mechanics of this. It is a loop. 1. The government spends more than it earns. 2. It issues an IOU, which we call a treasury bond. 3. The Fed presses a button, or in the old days, prints a bill and creates new dollars to buy that bond. 4. The government takes the new dollars and spends them. This removed the physical limit on debt. Before the Fed, debt was limited by nature. After the Fed, debt was limited only by imagination. This allowed the U.S. government to borrow for World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and the welfare state. It allowed the debt to grow from millions to billions to trillions. But remember Paterson? The debt pays interest. Who gets that interest? The bondholders. And where does the value come from? It comes from inflation. Every time the Fed prints money to buy debt, the dollars in your pocket become worth a little less. It is a hidden tax, a tax that doesn't require a vote, a tax that slowly bleeds the purchasing power of the working class and transfers it to the asset-holding class. The trap was now infinite, but it still wasn't aggressive enough for the developing world. It needed an enforcer. Now, you might be thinking, okay, tech, this is all fascinating history. But what happens when the math breaks? What happens when a country simply cannot pay the interest? That brings us to the final architect, the enforcer, Paul Volcker. In the late 1970s, the system was shaking. Inflation in America was out of control. The dollar was losing trust. Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Fed, decided to do something drastic. He raised interest rates to the moon. 20%. It worked for America. It killed inflation. But it triggered a nuclear winter for the rest of the world. You see, during the 70s, developing nations, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, countries in Asia had been encouraged to borrow billions of US dollars to build infrastructure. The bankers told them it was cheap money. When Volcker hiked the rates, The interest payments on those loans tripled overnight. These countries were bankrupt. Insolvency was mathematically guaranteed. In a true free market, the banks who lent them the money, Citi, Chase, Bank of America, would have taken the loss. They made a bad bet. They should have lost their money. But that's not how this system is designed. Volcker and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, introduced a new rule: bailout through restructuring. They gave these desperate countries new loans, not to build schools or hospitals, but just to pay the interest on the old loans to the Western banks. But this money came with conditions, brutal conditions. In exchange for the bailout, these nations had to sell their national resources, privatize their state industries, and cut spending on their own populations. This proved the final dark truth of the system. When debt becomes unpayable, the creditors don't forgive it. They use it as a weapon. They restructure it to make it eternal, stripping the country of its assets while keeping the interest flowing. It's not financial aid. It's a foreclosure on national sovereignty. This is why developing nations can never seem to develop fully. They are running on a treadmill designed by their creditors. So, let's put the entire puzzle together. William Paterson made debt permanent. Nathan Rothschild made it global and interconnected. The Federal Reserve made it infinite. And the modern system made it enforceable. Today, that $315 trillion isn't a crisis waiting to be solved. It's a business model operating exactly as designed. Every single dollar of that debt is an asset on someone else's balance sheet, held by megabanks, asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard, and hedge funds. It generates interest every second of every day. And who pays that interest? Ultimately, it comes from you. It comes from your taxes. It comes from the inflation that eats your wage. It comes from the austerity measures that cut your services. It is the largest wealth transfer in human history, moving wealth from the working population to the financial elite, running silently in the background of our lives. They tell you debt is a burden they are trying to fix. I'm telling you, they built the machine to work this way. If you want to understand how the world really works, you have to stop looking at politics and start looking at the ledger. 38 trillion is not a mistake. It is the bars of the cage. Subscribe if you want to understand who holds the keys, because the only way to escape the trap is to first admit that you are in one. I'm the Economic Chronicler, and I'll see you in the next one.